The smoke didn't rise anymore. It hung in the air like breath held too long, a ghost suspended above the earth. Charred pine stumps jutted up like broken fingers from the ground, still warm underfoot, though the fire had passed days ago. The forest was no longer forest, just memory and soot. And through the silence, the engine of an old Chevy pickup hummed like a stubborn heartbeat, threading its way up the fire line road. Jacob's hands stayed tight on the wheel, eyes flicking between the cracked windshield and the trail ahead. His jaw clenched with the kind of tension that didn't make sound, just settled in the shoulders and spine, like ash in the lungs. Ellie was with her aunt today. He'd told her he was heading to the shop, maybe the market. That was a lie, though not a cruel one. The search had been called off 2 days ago. They'd found no sign of the missing firefighter. Ray, her name was. Ray Carter, 32. Veteran of 4 wildland operations. Lost contact when the winds shifted and the backline got swallowed. The teams searched, the helicopters scanned, the radios went silent. Eventually, everyone agreed. If she were alive, she'd have signaled by now. But Jacob had been raised by a woman who used to say, "Hope is what you carry when no one else will." And he carried it now, even if it felt heavy and stupid and raw. He slowed as the trail narrowed, 2 tire tracks now, hemmed in by brittle black trees. The smoke thinned but didn't clear, like it was trying to forget how to disappear. He parked beside a downed power pole, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air bit his throat with every breath. He pulled a cloth bandana from his pocket, tied it over his mouth, and started walking. The forest floor crunched under his boots, brittle as glass. He moved with practiced steps, slow, methodical, watching where the soil gave under his weight. Fire had a strange way of revealing things. Old nails. Bottles. Tools lost decades ago. The past rose in burnt offering. He kept walking. A bird called out once, sharp and uncertain, then fell silent again. The deeper he went, the quieter it got. Not a holy silence, more the kind that comes after screaming. Trees leaned like mourners. The wind shifted and carried the faintest echo of something that wasn't wind. A sound. A scrape? He stopped. Waited. Nothing. He moved toward it anyway, stepping over a scorched log, skirting a ring of melted cans, someone's old camping site, now barely recognizable. Then again, a noise. Softer now. A dragging shuffle. A whisper? Jacob crouched, scanning the uneven ground. His eyes narrowed. There. A print. Not a boot exactly, more like a partial heel, heavy drag. Then, another. And blood. Not a trail, just a small rusted bloom on a gray stone. He followed the prints. The terrain sloped downward, into a basin where the fire had burned hottest. Here, even the rocks had blistered. He slipped once, caught himself, then paused to listen. Silence. But a charged silence. Like something held its breath. Then, so faint he thought he imagined it, a voice. Over here. He froze. Here. It was hoarse, cracked. Not loud. Not urgent. Just resigned. Like the voice wasn't sure if it was still allowed to be real. He stepped carefully around a half-fallen cedar. The roots had come up, forming a hollow. And in that hollow, barely visible beneath branches and ash, was a figure. Ray. Her uniform was torn and dark with soot. Her face was scratched, lips split, a long burn up her arm. But her eyes were open. And they met his like they already knew the end of this story. Took you long enough, she rasped. He knelt beside her without a word. Gently lifted the branches. Her left leg was twisted under her at the wrong angle. Her right hand was clutching a snapped radio. He pulled a flask from his coat pocket. Not whiskey. Water. Lifted it to her lips. She drank like someone remembering what it meant to want something. Just 2 sips. Then she looked away. I didn't mean for them to waste their time. Jacob didn't answer. He took off his coat, wrapped it around her, then unhooked the brace from his hiking pack. It was meant for carrying logs. Or people. Can you hold on? He asked, voice low. She gave him the faintest of nods. Not going anywhere. The lift wasn't smooth. She winced, groaned, but didn't cry out. He shifted her onto his back, secured the straps. Then he stood. Her breath warmed the side of his neck, erratic and fragile. They moved slowly. Every step was measured. The fire line above shimmered in the late afternoon light. Smoke curled at the edges like a curtain pulling closed. "Name's Ray," she whispered after a while. "I know," he said. "Jacob." "Jacob what?" "Just Jacob." She laughed once. It hurt. She coughed. "Figures." They reached the ridge by twilight. The truck was a shadow in the distance, a shape more than a thing. Jacob's legs burned. But he didn't stop. "Why'd you come?" she asked suddenly. He didn't answer at first. Then, "Because maybe not everything burns." She went quiet again. The wind picked up. Somewhere down the valley, a tree groaned and fell. At the truck, he laid her in the passenger seat. She winced as he adjusted her leg, wrapped a jacket under her head. The dome light made her look almost like herself again. She turned her head toward him. "Did they give up?" she asked. He hesitated. "They thought they had no choice." She blinked slowly. "But you didn't." He shook his head. "Didn't feel like I had one." For a long moment, neither moved. Then, from his glove box, he pulled out a leather bracelet, tattered, once red, now smoke-colored. His wife's. He looked at it, then tucked it in the console, close enough to remember, far enough to let it rest. Ray watched but didn't comment. Instead, she reached up, barely, and touched his wrist with 2 fingers. "You brought me out," she said, voice paper-thin. "Yeah," he replied. But what he meant was you weren't the only one. The engine turned over, old but stubborn. They drove down the mountain, headlights slicing through fog and ash. Behind them, the forest slept. Ahead, something else waited, half miracle, half reckoning. And in the cab, between silence and smoke, sat 2 people who hadn't been sure they were still allowed to come back. But they were coming back anyway. The room smelled of pine resin and boiled coffee, and something underneath, old flannel and rain-damp earth. Morning seeped through the cabin windows in thin golden strips, and Ray Carter blinked against it, surprised she had slept at all. Her body was still a battlefield, one leg braced and wrapped, ribs like cracked fence boards, throat dry as char. But there was light. Warm, filtered, quiet light. She stirred slightly. The couch creaked beneath her. Across the room, the man moved through the small kitchen, barefoot, quiet, focused. He cracked 2 eggs into a pan like it was a sacred ritual, not breakfast. His back was straight, movements economical. "Jacob. Just Jacob. Where am I?" Ray croaked. He didn't turn immediately. "Cabin. North side of Ridge Valley." She coughed once, a dry rasp. "Thought I was dead." "You were close," he replied without drama, sliding the eggs onto a chipped plate. "But not today." She glanced around. A wood stove nestled in the corner, flames murmuring low. A rifle hung above the door, not for show. Boots lined up neatly beneath the bench. Everything here was quiet. Not somber, just still. Like grief had passed through, but hadn't been allowed to stay. He brought the plate to her lap and set a steaming mug beside it. She raised an eyebrow. "I don't eat eggs," she muttered. "Then don't." But she did. Carefully. Slowly. Because warmth was rare, and flavor was even rarer, and something inside her needed to be reminded she still wanted things. He didn't hover. Just sat in a chair near the window and sipped his own coffee, staring out into the trees like they might speak to him if he waited long enough. How long was I out? 2 nights. Her breath caught. You should have taken me to the hospital. Road was closed. Mudslide. His voice held no apology. You could have radioed. I did. No one answered. The silence between them thickened. Ray adjusted on the couch, winced, tried to stretch but flinched halfway through. You carried me? She asked eventually. He nodded once. Didn't seem right to leave you. She stared at the mug in her hands. Her fingers still trembled faintly, not from cold anymore, but memory. I don't remember much. Just fire. Then the ground falling. Then. She trailed off, eyes narrowing. A voice. I thought I imagined it. Jacob didn't respond. He just took another sip. She studied him. Not much older than her, maybe early 40s. Lines carved deep around his eyes, not from frowning, but from squinting into distance too long. A scar along his jaw like lightning frozen mid-strike. This was a man who had seen things burn before. You don't talk much, do you? She said. He looked over at her. Not unless I have something to say. A ghost of a smile tugged her mouth. That's dangerous. Means people actually listen when you do. He didn't smile back, but something softened in the set of his shoulders. Later that day, he helped her out onto the porch. The sun was brighter than she remembered. Everything looked bleached, reborn. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her foot elevated on a stool. She let the silence stretch as far as it wanted before she broke it. I've been a firefighter for 12 years, she said, mostly to the horizon. I've jumped out of helicopters, driven into flames. I've seen houses crackle like tinderboxes and men cry into ash. Jacob listened. But that fire. That one, she hesitated. I wasn't ready. No reply. Just the creak of the porch boards beneath his boots. I lost contact with my crew, she continued. Tried to hold the line anyway. I thought maybe if I just kept cutting firebreaks, I could stall it long enough for someone to see. But the wind turned. And it swallowed everything. A bird landed on the rail. A small thing, blue feathers, nervous wings. I wasn't afraid of dying, she whispered. I was afraid I wouldn't matter when I did. She turned then, expecting pity. But all she saw was understanding. Not from a man who'd worn a uniform, but from someone who knew what it meant to keep walking after everyone else had stopped. Most people are afraid of being forgotten, Jacob said. Doesn't make you weak. She stared at him. What are you afraid of? He took a long moment, then looked toward the woods. Stopping. That night, rain tapped softly against the roof like a memory returning gently. Ray lay on the couch, watching shadows dance on the ceiling. The pain was constant but quieter now, like a companion learning not to speak over her. She shifted and saw something on the coffee table. A bracelet. Faded leather, the edges singed, a silver charm half melted. Not hers. She didn't touch it. Just looked at it for a long time. The next morning, Jacob wasn't in the cabin when she woke. A note sat on the kitchen counter, written in tight, deliberate script. Back before noon. Check the kettle. It's new water. She smiled faintly, then cursed as she tried to stand. Her leg barked in protest. She leaned on the crutch he'd left her, adjusted the brace, and limped toward the window. Fog pressed against the glass. Beyond it, trees stood like quiet sentries. The forest still wore its wounds, but the green was coming back, slow and defiant. Jacob returned before noon, as promised, carrying supplies and something wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the table without comment. Ray peeled back the cloth to reveal a small cast-iron pan and a stack of letters, smoke-damaged but intact. "These were at the ranger station," he said. "Yours." She picked one up, eyes scanning the address. "My brother," she said. "He died in a blaze last spring. I never opened these." "You don't have to." But she did. She read the first one aloud that night by the fire. Her voice was hoarse, cracking in places, but steady. Jacob sat in the armchair, watching the flames, not her. When she finished, neither of them spoke. Some griefs didn't need answers. Just space. The days stretched. Ray began to heal, not just in body, but in the rhythm of quiet things. Washing dishes one-handed, hobbling out to feed the birds, listening to Ellie's voice over the phone as she called her father to say goodnight. The girl's laughter filtered through the speaker like a soft wind through pine. "Your daughter?" Ray asked one evening. "Ellie. 7. Smarter than me, already. She sounds happy." "She is. You're lucky." Jacob shook his head. "No. I'm careful. Happiness is fragile. You have to hold it without squeezing." She turned that over like a stone in her hand. The conflict that had felt like fire now felt more like water. Quiet, persistent, reshaping her from the inside. She wasn't sure what she owed the world anymore. But here, in this space that asked nothing of her but presence, she felt the first stirrings of something close to forgiveness. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch again, Ray asked, "Why'd you really come out there?" "To that burn." Jacob took a long breath. "My wife used to hike that trail," he said. "She died last year. Cancer. Real slow. Real cruel. I couldn't carry her when it mattered. But I thought, maybe I could still carry someone." Ray blinked hard. "And you found me." "I did." The wind shifted. Smoke from the wood stove curled around them like a blanket. She reached for his hand without looking. Just laid her fingers over his. No words. Just warmth. And in that moment, there were no fire lines or broken radios or unanswered calls. Just two people who had walked through fire and come out on the same side. And the ghosts, for once, stayed quiet. The wind had shifted again. Where it once brought the sting of smoke and scorched soil, now it carried the scent of pine needles and damp moss, as if the earth were breathing back after too long holding still. In the quiet of that recovery, Ray Carter moved down the porch steps one careful crutch at a time, her breath visible in the chill morning air. Her leg throbbed with every shift, but it was healing. The ache had softened into something tolerable. Jacob was in the shed, the rattle of his tools drifting out like a familiar tune. She'd learned to recognize his moods by sound, the way the wrench struck metal, the way he cleared his throat once before speaking. He worked as if fixing the world one bolt at a time. She made her way to the garden bed, or what was left of it. The fire hadn't touched this far, but the frost had. Dead vines curled like forgotten letters. Ray knelt slowly, ignoring the pull in her hip, and dug her fingers into the soil. Beneath the crust, it was still dark and rich. Alive. "Starting over," came his voice from behind. She didn't turn. "Something like that." He set a bucket beside her. Inside were seeds, sunflower, mint, tomato. Wrapped in brown paper, labeled in a child's handwriting. "Ellie picked them out," he said. Ray smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Tell her I like her taste." He didn't say anything else, just sat on the step, elbows on knees, watching her dig. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It had shape, texture, like fabric worn soft. Later, over tea, Ray stared at the envelope on the table. The last letter from her brother. The edges were water-stained. Smoke had yellowed the corners. It was unopened. She tapped it twice. Jacob didn't speak. "I don't know why I didn't read it before," she said. Maybe I thought it would end something. Or begin something, he replied. She nodded. He was the one who got me into firefighting. Said we don't get to pick what burns, only what we save. Her fingers slid under the seal. The paper crackled like dry leaves. She unfolded the letter slowly, reverently. Ray, she read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you carry everything, every life, every loss. But you don't have to carry it alone. Let someone meet you halfway. Her throat tightened. She folded the letter and slid it beside her plate, hands trembling. Jacob pushed a mug toward her. He sounds like someone who saw you clearly. He was, she said. He always knew where to dig. That evening, Ellie arrived. Small boots stomped up the steps, curls wild, cheeks pink from the cold. She ran into Jacob's arms without hesitation, then looked at Ray like she was evaluating a guest at her tea party. You're the lady from the fire, she said. I am. Ellie looked at her father. Is she staying? Jacob glanced at Ray. Ray looked at the girl, then nodded. Just for a little while. Ellie seemed to accept that. She pulled a bundle from her coat and handed it over. I made you something. Inside was a drawing, 3 stick figures standing under a crooked tree. One had wild hair, another had a long leg cast. The last one had a wrench in hand. Above them, in big pink letters, us. Ray blinked fast. Her voice caught. It's perfect. You forgot the sun, Jacob said lightly. Ellie rolled her eyes. The sun's behind them. That's why everything's glowing. Later, Ray helped Ellie build a feeder out of scrap wood. Her hands weren't steady, but Ellie didn't mind. She narrated the whole process like it was a construction site documentary. When they finished, Ray sat on the porch while Ellie scattered seed with both hands, giggling as birds fluttered near. You've got her laugh, Jacob said. Ray didn't respond at first. I never thought I'd hear it again, he added. You're a good dad, she said softly. His eyes met hers across the porch. I'm trying. She looked down at the cast on her leg. Me too. As the days passed, Ray found herself rising earlier. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She swept the cabin floor, stirred soup, sketched rough plans in a notebook for a small fire shelter near the trailhead, one just big enough for a cot, a kettle, and a radio that wouldn't die when it was needed most. Jacob noticed. He didn't comment. One afternoon, she asked to help him fix the old outboard motor that had been sitting half dead in the shed. He looked at her skeptically, then handed her a wrench. I haven't done this in a while, she said. Start with the bolts. Let your hands remember. They worked in silence. Ray's fingers slipped more than once, her palm bruising against cold metal. But Jacob didn't correct her. He let her fail, let her try again. And when the engine finally coughed to life, she whooped, an ugly, raw sound that made both of them laugh harder than they had in months. That night, Jacob found her standing by the edge of the clearing, looking at the stars. I thought about going back, she said. To the crew. To the fires. You still might. I'm not sure I want to. He waited. I think I just want to matter. But not the way I used to. He stepped beside her. You already do. She turned her face to him. Why didn't you run when I showed up broken? I don't run from broken, he said. I just know how to sit with it. In the morning, Ray woke to sunlight and birdsong. She opened the cabin door and stepped out without her crutches for the first time. Her leg trembled, and the pain was sharp, but she stood. Ellie cheered from the swing. You did it. Ray laughed, a full-bodied, startled sound. I guess I did. Jacob looked up from the garden, where he was planting mint. Guess we all did, he said. She joined him slowly, lowered herself beside the newly turned soil, and pressed her palm into the dirt. It was cold, damp, alive. "You know," she said, brushing hair from her face, "I used to think I had to earn peace. Like it was something granted only after suffering. And now, I think peace is what you let in when the fire's over. Not something you wait for, something you choose." Jacob nodded once. "And forgiveness." She looked at him. "That too." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Ray pulled the old bracelet from the drawer. She slid it onto her wrist beside her brother's letter, folded now and worn soft. Two histories. Not healed, but no longer open. Jacob sat on the porch, his guitar across his lap. He strummed a few notes, nothing structured, just the kind of sound that fills spaces where words won't go. Ray stepped out, stood beside him, and watched the sky bleed orange into purple. "I'm not ready to leave," she said. "You don't have to." "I might still," she added. "One day. Then we'll call this a beginning," he said. And she nodded. Because beginnings didn't have to be loud. Sometimes they were just the quiet decision to stay. The town hadn't changed much, though Ray noticed the silence in it now. It wasn't that people weren't speaking, it was the way they did, a little slower, a little softer, as if the wind might carry their words too far if they weren't careful. The fire had left more than scars on the land. It had singed the edges of everyone's confidence. The flyer had come a week before, dropped off by a neighbor at Jacob's fence, a fundraiser and memorial gathering for the local crews and their families. The entire valley was invited. Ray had stared at the paper for almost an hour before saying anything. She'd folded it neatly and left it by the sink without a word. Now, on the morning of the event, she stood in front of the cabin mirror, one hand braced on the edge of the table. Her reflection still startled her sometimes. The limp. The new silver thread in her hair. The faint mark across her cheek, shaped like the edge of flame. Her dress was simple, gray cotton, soft against her skin. She hadn't worn a dress since before the fire. Jacob stood at the doorway, watching. He didn't say she looked beautiful. He didn't need to. He handed her a small box. Inside were Ellie's boots, cleaned and polished. "I think she'd want you to wear them," he said. Ray pressed her lips together and nodded once. The town hall was lit up with string lights and paper lanterns. Outside, folding chairs lined the perimeter of the green, and children chased each other with sticky hands and sparklers. A table of photographs sat beneath an archway, faces of those lost, those still healing. Ray's own name had been etched onto a temporary plaque weeks ago. She wasn't supposed to walk back through that door. But she did. Slowly, carefully, with Jacob beside her. People noticed. Conversations stopped. Eyes turned. Someone whispered, "She's alive." Then others moved toward her. A hand on her arm. A choked greeting. A hug from a woman she didn't know, tight and shaking. The fire captain, grizzled and wide-eyed, stared for a full minute before drawing her into his arms without asking. "I thought we'd lost you," he said into her hair. "You almost did," she murmured. But someone wouldn't let go. Jacob stood off to the side, quiet. Ray reached for his hand and pulled him forward. She didn't explain who he was. She didn't need to. At dusk, the crowd quieted as names were read. Bells chimed with each. The air was still, reverent. When they called her name last, no bell followed, just silence, held open like a breath no one wanted to exhale. Ray stepped up to the microphone. Her hand trembled slightly. Not from nerves, more from memory. But her voice held. "I wasn't the only one rescued out there," she said. "There was a fire, yes. But there was also a man who walked into it. Not because he had to. Because he wouldn't leave someone behind. And there was a girl, who reminded me what grace looks like when it's unafraid. And there was this place, this town, that believed in remembering people even when they're gone, and sometimes, even when they're not. She looked at Jacob. I came back because someone waited for me. Not loudly. Just long enough. A hush followed her words. Then applause. Not loud. Just steady, rising like warmth. Afterward, Ellie found her by the lemonade stand and slipped her hand into Ray's. Can we go plant something now? The girl asked. Ray bent low, smiling. Yes. Yes, we can. They returned to the ridge the next morning, the sun climbing slow through the smoke-colored sky. Ray carried a sapling in one hand, a blue spruce. Ellie skipped ahead, Jacob behind them with a shovel slung over his shoulder. At the edge of the clearing, Ray stopped. This was where she'd first been found, barely breathing, half buried in ash. Now the earth here was softer. Eager, almost. She knelt and ran her fingers through the soil. Jacob handed her the shovel. She dug the first scoop herself. Ellie the second. Together, they carved a cradle for new life. The tree stood awkward and thin, but upright. For things that survive, Ray said. Jacob placed a hand on her back, grounding her. Ellie took a ribbon from her pocket and tied it around the base of the sapling. It fluttered slightly in the breeze. They stayed there long after the planting. Not talking. Just being. That night, Ray sat at the kitchen table alone. The wood stove crackled nearby. The bracelet was in her hand again, smoothed by time, almost colorless now. She turned it over once. Then opened the glove box of Jacob's truck and laid it gently inside. But beside it, she placed the folded letter. Her brother's. The one that told her she didn't have to carry everything alone. 2 anchors. One to grieve, one to grow. When she returned to the porch, Jacob was there with 2 mugs and a guitar across his lap. The stars were out, bright and unfiltered, no longer hidden by smoke. She sat beside him, pulled the blanket over her legs, and exhaled. I'm staying, she said. He didn't reply. Just strummed a quiet chord and looked up at the sky. And Ray, for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, let herself lean into the moment. Not because it was safe or perfect, but because it was true. Sometimes, miracles don't roar. They arrive quiet as breath, and stay as long as someone leaves the porch light on. If this story touched you, subscribe and please share. How would you rate this story on a scale of 1 to 10?